Hey, this is Katie and Catherine, and we're here to give you the 411K. Cheers!
Heather Fier is here to help preach the gospel of budget-minded weddings. In early 2019, Heather released her first book, The Wedding Hacker, a budget-minded planning playbook. In 2018, Heather stepped back from her leadership role at Natural Selection Promotions to follow her passion, helping couples plan weddings without jeopardizing their financial stability. She has been busy launching the Wedding Hacker Planning Club, which aims to provide affordable wedding planning guidance and support to couples who thought that a wedding planner was out of reach.
So Heather, I think we heard that you got married 10 years ago, and we really wanted to kick this off with learning a little bit about your wedding. You were a relatively young bride. Did you consider yourself savvy on the budget front? Did you fall for all the wedding upselling that gets thrown at you? You know, what's your personal story about your wedding itself?
Oh yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So I am kind of a spendthrift. My husband makes fun of me on this, that I really, really love getting a good deal. So when we were getting married, there was no option in my mind of spending what I saw the industry averages were. I was immediately going into my mode of problem solving and looking at the situation to find solutions outside of the box. I started digging into resources locally in San Diego, where we both had grown up, trying to find places that would be an awesome, beautiful venue for our wedding, but would not cost an arm and a leg. And I quickly kind of started unraveling the system that's here in the wedding industry. And I found that there were resources outside of the wedding industry, even 10 years ago, before the internet was what it is now. I've managed to find these resources. And that's a lot of what started the foundation of what I do now. But it was really tricky, and it took, some struggling. And basically what we ended up planning for our wedding was a beautiful wedding in a park. We took the risk to have an outdoor ceremony. The cost for the venue for our ceremony was, I think, $100 because it's just a park, and we rented our own chairs. All the groomsmen had the job of helping to load and unload chairs. So we had our wedding party kind of involved in labor of things, which wasn't, as fancy as some people would like their wedding to be. But for our group and our friends, this was perfectly fine. And we just had it really organized. The schedule, the timeline for the day was really dialed in. It was very low stress. We had relatives helping with many different tasks. I had my husband's aunt doing my hair. I had a friend doing makeup. We had my grandma do flowers. We just really all came together. And it actually made the day even more special because we got to involve all those people in the process and have them in this journey in a bigger way than just seeing them at the party. And then for the reception, we actually found a really awesome deal that was at a hotel, but it was a hotel with a restaurant inside of it. And so we were able to get the venue for no cost at all, and we just paid for the food and beverage. And there was a minimum of, I think, $2,000. We had 80 people, and we pretty much just spent over the $2,000 on food and beverage because I managed to negotiate in that I could bring in all my own wine, and any wine I brought in, there was no corkage fee or anything. So champagne and wine were the main drinks. And then if anyone wanted beer or a mixed drink, we made that a cash bar. So we did limit it that way. But for our group, everyone was just happy to have the wine for free. And everyone had a great time, drank plenty, and they were on the dance floor late into the night. So it was awesome. Overall, our whole wedding cost, I think, in the ballpark of like $7,500. Other things that I did leverage that I really encourage people to in the planning guidance that I give folks now is I got a dress that was a sample sale dress. So it had been pre-loved in a shop. People had been trying it on and, deciding to buy that dress. I bought the one that they'd been trying on, and it was a $1,500 dress I got for $150. So all these sort of tricks that I teach couples now were things I was using back then. They were just a little harder to find at the time. Obviously, in the program I run now, I centralize all that, make it really easy, and guide people to these money-saving resources each step of the way.
Well, free wine I can certainly get behind.
Definitely. And
I'm so impressed with your budget for your location as well. I mean, if you were kind of in the middle of a small town somewhere, I might say, yeah, sure, that doesn't really apply to me. But San Diego's, it's a hub city. It's a big city.
It is. It's a big city, and it's an expensive place to have a wedding. Most weddings in this town, I would say, cost well over $20,000. $3,000 because folks are going to those traditional venues. They're kind of following the path laid out in front of them, and us just veering off at several key points allowed for big savings.
You got your family, you got your friends really involved in the wedding day. And there's a lot of wedding pressures from a lot of those people sometimes when you're planning. So, from relatives, friends, just that traditional societal path set forth in front of all of us. How were you able to push through kind of the traditional BS that's out there in the wedding industry to have a day that you really wanted? And then is it important to tap into the right resources and support network when planning?
Definitely. Having the right support network is key because, as is said with money, you will earn as much as the 5 people you interact with the most. You'll spend as much as the 5 people you're around the most. And I feel like in weddings, it's the same thing. So if you're surrounding yourself with a lot of people who have the tendency to go big and are going to encourage you to spend, that's what will happen. So that's a big part of why developing a group around you who can help you support your vision to keep your wedding on budget is critical to actually achieving that. Whatever your budget is, even if you had a $20,000 or $30,000 budget, most couples go over budget because they are not having someone reinforce that accountability to stay within it. So that's huge. As far as handling the potential drama of relatives and family and friends, I certainly have, a big group of family and friends around. So there was plenty of opportunity for things to get a little crazy. Looking back on it, there probably were a few hot button issues. I remember buying my dress online from a sample sale website at the time was really uncommon. Definitely freaked my mom out. Definitely freaked my grandma out. They didn't like that we weren't getting to go do the traditional process of trying on dresses and having that moment. But instead, what I just kind of charged ahead and I was like, well, this dress is such a good deal. If I buy it and hate it, I can burn it and it really doesn't matter if it's such an insignificant amount of money compared to what normal dresses cost. So I was like, let's just go for it. And then when we got the dress, I tried it on at home, had my mom there, had my grandma come by. Everybody kind of got to be involved and enjoy that special moment. But we just did it at home. So we still found a way to make it special. One thing that did get a little touchy was the flowers, involving my mom and grandma in helping with those. Personally, florals are not really my cup of tea. I think they're beautiful, but as far as my taste goes, I could just get basic vases and put them, flowers that I picked up, mixed bouquets from Trader Joe's and throw those on the tables and I'd be happy. From a wedding planning perspective, your guests will not appreciate those florals enough to make them worth doing much more than that, in my opinion. Now, other people, obviously, they love their flowers. They love peonies. They love, these really gorgeous, specific varietals that are going to just blow them away. But for me, I don't get the joy out of that. And I don't see the ROI, the return on investment from your guest experience to validate those expenses. My grandma, my mom, they wanted to go bigger on that. I pushed back and basically said, if you want to make them yourself, we can go and get these flowers at the local floral, warehouse. We went to like a wholesale warehouse and stock up and you can make whatever you want to make. And if you guys are passionate about it, you enjoy that, I just give you full ownership of it. And then that really took me out of the mix of being potentially in some sort of conflict with them because I just let them steer the boat. That was important to them. It gave them kind of their aspect of the wedding to really get involved in and dive deep with. And then I just stepped back. And I found that to be a good way to handle that. And I do encourage couples to find a way to include relatives. And if they're finding that conflict, let that person have ownership of an aspect of it, whether it's the rehearsal dinner, some flowers, helping maybe with the invitations. If there's an aspect that's not super high priority to you, let someone else kind of take charge of it if they're really seeming eager to be involved and have something on their plate.
Oh, Heather, I love this advice. I feel like you're my long lost sister. I have had very similar conversations with my friends over the years, and I often have felt like it's fallen on deaf ears a bit. Mm-hmm. I always tell people, especially in that floral front, because I was very similar. I could have cared less about the flowers. I said, these are some colors I like. And the florist was on the phone with me and my mom being like, so do you want this? Do you want that? And I was like, I don't really care. You're the expert. You have your budget, just run with it. And I think her mouth was open for half of that conversation because she was like, how can you not care and you're getting married? And And B, but I always tell people, if I can't eat it, if I can't drink it, if I can't dance to it, I'm probably not going to remember it from your wedding. And like, that just makes it so easy to narrow it down to your priorities for what you want for your day. At least for me, it did.
Yes, there are many, many details of a wedding that couples tend to fixate on and prioritize when you look at it from the guest perspective, they're completely insignificant. And that's hard to hear because when you're in that zone planning a wedding and you get that tunnel vision, you suddenly see little details as so important, like where you will cry and you will spend a night drinking wine and mourning that the napkins don't have your wedding date, they just have your names on them. And it's like, nobody cares. Like the reality is they don't care and it's going to go in the trash can. And you're investing your heart and soul and these tears and your money into something that looking back, no one's going to know. And honestly, you will eventually start to forget those things. All that you'll look back on and remember is that you got married to this amazing person that you wanted to be with and that you had a fun time. Your guests aren't going to notice them. You're not going to get time to notice them. Like, just let it go. Don't stress.
I'm just like feeling very validated right now, which is making me feel so good. I feel validated by the fact that I shouldn't be worrying about napkins right now or anything like that.
Katie's also super lucky because she has a mom and two sisters who she can totally delegate things that people care about too, I think.
It goes back to exactly what you said. Like you find out like what everyone's little priorities are. And I just found out that my mom cared about flowers. So you end up sort of figuring out like, oh, I had no idea that those are the things you care about. These are the things I care about. We'll try and find some weird blend where everyone kind of gets what they want.
Yes, giving them ownership of some aspect of the event is so helpful. And also having those discussions about expectations with your relatives early on is essential. If you don't discuss, one, your budget with all the people who are contributing, so your future in-laws, your parents, maybe some other random, very generous relatives, you have to do that. And also when you have that conversation, you have to discuss their expectations. Because like you said, if they see some particular aspect as super important and to you it's not, and you just cut it, that's going to be a big drama that blows up in your face. So talking with them and hearing that some aspect of the day that maybe you would have overlooked is really important to them. And then going, hey, if that's important to you, why don't you help make those decisions and you can make the calls on those details. That's going to help alleviate potential drama. It's going to make everything run a lot more smoothly. Honestly, it's kind of hard to open those conversations up. It's a little scary and uncomfortable, but it is so important to have those conversations early on.
Exactly. Catherine, were there any hot spots when you were planning your wedding?
We had two weddings, so I think that was kind of tricky. And at the time we lived in Poland, so we had a civil ceremony there, and then we had like a bigger wedding with my family in the Boston area. So it was within a year we had two weddings. I often tell people that our civil ceremony which ended up being, whatever the fee is to get married at City Hall and dinner for 30 of our nearest and dearest friends and my husband's family locally, ended up being as memorable, if not more memorable, as the 130 person big fat Greek wedding we had in Boston. There was zero stress related to the dinner in a restaurant after City Hall, as opposed to having to coordinate a larger reception and caterers and decorations or whatever were these things and details that did catch me out at the last minute, possibly because I didn't care that much and people wanted me to make more decisions about it than I really have ever expected to. The fact that we had two weddings just really highlighted for me that smaller can often feel better. I don't want to take the quote unquote fun out of it for people who want the big wedding and have always dreamt of that and maybe have a healthy budget to work with. But I guess I also equally like to validate those people who may not have the budget and or may not see the excitement and or buy into it as much, and to tell them that it is okay to want a smaller event.
I love to hear that experience you had with the two weddings. And I think it's absolutely true. If people jump into wedding planning and suddenly think they're some master crafter, right? They're going to do like 50 DIY projects. They have this vision of this day they're going to put together. But the reality is being a wedding planner is one of the top 10 most stressful jobs. And there's a reason that it's so difficult, because you're going to put together this event and then stuff's going to break. You're You're going to book a vendor, they're going to cancel. You're going to invite people, they can't come. All these things that you start putting this beautiful vision in your mind, and things aren't going to start landing exactly how you expect, and processing that can be really difficult, especially when you're so emotionally invested and it's your day. So I think sometimes if you can be self-aware enough to look at your wedding and go, I don't really care about X, Y, and Z. These things, A, B, and C, those are my priorities, and I'm going to invest my time and my energy and money there and let these other parts go. And if other relatives, friends bring up, oh, why didn't you do favors? Well, I didn't want to. And that's a good enough reason, just there. And the reality is no one's going to leave your wedding mad that they did not get a favor. What happens most of the time with a detail like that is easily 50% of the guests forget to take the favor with them because they had so much fun, enjoyed your lovely open bar all night, and are stumbling out to their taxi and like not even thinking about the favor. So it's just keeping the focus on what you really enjoy when you attend a wedding, and then when you're planning the wedding for yourself, planning it based on that, and also giving yourself room to enjoy those things at your wedding. Because if you overpack your day too much, you don't even get a moment to breathe, any chance to enjoy it. You're just flowing on this crazy schedule throughout the day.
It sounds like you've seen me at a wedding before. Weird.
Katie, I just had this brilliant idea. I think your favors should be like little hangover cure packages, like aspirin.
Seriously, I was just going to have the hotel give everyone like a coconut water and a bagel on their way out.
I love it.
It's all going to be okay.
Sober up, people.
They will appreciate that more, honestly, than some beautiful thing you spend hours crafting that they leave on the table.
The number of guests can be a really big determiner of what venue you pick and also has a big impact on the cost. Do you have any tips or tricks for managing the guest list before it gets out of control?
I do, and I will tell you that this technique I use is a little harsh. Sometimes when I explain it to people, they're like, oh, this seems mean. But the reality is you have to cut people. Like, this is just the process of making a guest list. There is, at some level, you feel a little mean because you can't include everyone, but your budget is limited. It is what it is. So I recommend setting up a wedding guest list in tiers. So tier 1 are the people you absolutely must have at your wedding. If you couldn't have them at your wedding, you would reschedule your wedding. So this is going to be a really small group. It's basically probably your immediate family, your very closest friends, people who might even be included in the wedding party. Then you go down to tier 2. Tier 2 are people you would love to have at your wedding. You'd be disappointed if they couldn't attend, but the show would go on. And tier 3 are people who are obligatory invitees or folks that are kind of a little step away. You'd like them to be there. It'd be kind of cool if they were there, but they're not necessarily a make or break person for you. And then when you get to actually sending out save the dates, I would only send save the dates to people in tier 1 and tier 2 if they are out of town. For me, save the dates are a nice warning to give someone who needs to travel to your wedding. That's all it is. It's just that warning for out of town people. So you don't need to send a save the date to warn someone that lives 30 minutes from your venue. They don't need a warning a year in advance that your wedding's coming up. It's 30 minutes away. They don't need a hotel. They're local. But the people who are going to have to fly in, they have to drive more than a few hours and get a hotel, those folks need save the dates. And the only ones who get them are tier 1, tier 2, people you really want there. Tier 3, you wait till the invite level. So when you get months before your wedding, about 3 months approximately before your wedding, you're going to send out tier 1 and tier 2 invites. Then you wait and start getting your RSVPs. Personally, I would recommend doing all digitally. I wouldn't send RSVP cards. This is another spot to save incrementally. Then as you get these RSVPs and you start getting the no's, you have that list of tier 3 people in order of highest priority to lowest priority, and you start sending out their invite. So you don't send them all out at the same time. You're staggering things. Now, where this can get tricky is as the wedding gets really close, because you may be sending one of these invites out a week before the RSVP deadline. Send it out anyway, and then reach out to the person and say, hey, I haven't seen an RSVP from you. Did you get my invite? They're going to tell you no, because you just put it in your mailbox. Go, oh, well, it should be there anytime. Here is the link to the website so you can look at the details, and hopefully the invite shows up. A few days later, the invite invite shows up, they see it, they RSVP yes or no, and there's no harm, no foul. But what this allows you to do is keep that level of RSVP rates to a nice balance. In general, about 83% of local guests will RSVP yes to a wedding. So if you use this technique, you can draw that number down to about 70% of your total guest list attending, which is really important if you're on a tight budget and trying to keep your wedding within a more limited venue space.
No, but that's a fair point, Heather, because also you have to consider these venues do have a head count, right? There is also like a fire safety code.
Definitely. And for venues, there's generally a smaller room option in a lot of venues where maybe it can hold 80 or 100 people. And then it steps up to 200, 250 people. And when you have those big jumps in spaces, you're kind of stuck in an awkward position. Because if you wanted to invite 150 people, you may barely trickle into the larger room, but you wouldn't have enough people to fill the room. It's going to feel kind of empty. So it's better for your budget and for the vibe of the event to stick into the smaller room. But in order to do that, you're going to have to be really careful about how you manage your invite list.
Exactly. Another thing that I came across when I was looking at vendors, venues, the whole event math is super confusing. Like, I think we had to email and get booklet from like 10 venues and sit down with Excel spreadsheets to actually figure out how much a wedding for our size would actually cost. Is there any way to navigate this? Is there something that I'm missing?
If you're meaning event math as in the price per plate, which is very confusing, where you see, $49 plus, and then you're going to add that plus, meaning the taxes, the service fee, gratuities. There's a lot of extra fees in there where that price can, jump maybe 40, 50% easily from what you actually see on the paper. And then a lot of times the venues will include little fees. They're woven into the contract, and suddenly that price and the plus and all the hidden fees add up to this price that's double what you originally thought you were going to be paying. And that's pretty surprising and difficult for people. But as far as wedding math and how I recommend people build out their budget is I would start with how much you can spend, look at what priorities you have, build out the categories, the percentages that are suggested, just fully scrapping categories that don't fit your needs or interests, and then work from there and stay within those ranges when you book everything. So it's a little bit tricky if you're kind of blindly booking things and just going, what is an average wedding cost? I'm going to have 150 people. How much should that cost? It's 150 person wedding can cost $100. It can cost $2 million or more if you're, the Kardashians or whatever. So you can go big, you can go tiny. And it all just depends really in how you approach each step along the way. And that's a huge reason why I encourage the couples we work with to look outside of the wedding industrial complex, look at resources for just general events, for private events instead of weddings, because you can find photographers who don't charge a fee that has the wedding tax tapped on. Or you find venues that are not traditionally looked at as wedding venues, maybe a really beautiful art gallery. And that space is $100 an hour for the whole venue, and you can hold a cocktail reception there and a ceremony, and it's way more affordable than going and getting that preset all-inclusive venue.
That's exactly what I did, Heather. So when we were planning our larger, bigger wedding in the Boston area, I was in between that 80-person room and the, definitely not going to be in the 200-something person room. Ended up finding like a church hall that could be rented for anything, and it was, it did have a rental, but you could bring in your own caterer and your own bar. And I think our bar was an open bar all night, and it came to like $8 or $10 a person, which was a huge win because we knew we wanted to have an open bar. That was one of our priorities. And we brought in a caterer. I did find working with the caterer was easier, but one of the other driving factors for moving away from a traditional wedding venue was that when I was trying to plan the menu, there was, like you talked about, the price per person, right? The 49 plus. But then there was like, and here are the hors d'oeuvres, and they don't tell you how much except for like a platter. And like, I had no concept. My dad's a chef, by the way, and it still was like a really tricky concept to kind of try to price out what the cocktail hour would cost on top of the service charge, on top of, et cetera, et cetera. And I found the caterer to be much easier to kind of of work with in naming that price. I only found negotiating to be helpful up to a point, right? And in order to keep the cost down, it really became a numbers game for us. But what you are saying about some of the things that you negotiated on, like a cork fee or having it in a restaurant and being able to bring your own wine. I mean, I think that's something that I didn't think was an option. What else could I have tried saying or doing to get a venue to be more flexible?
Any venue that doesn't market itself as a wedding venue is going to be a lot more flexible inherently. So if you go to a venue that's out there blatantly advertising, trying to draw on every couple, they're going to have their prefix menu. Like you said, they have the price per person for dinner. They have appetizer options. They have some prefix bar pricing for different levels of bar. And that's that. You really don't have a lot of room to work with. What you did was really smart. You found a venue that allowed you to bring in the vendors you want. And the reason that helps is because you can target vendors who have flexibility and are willing to play with you, to negotiate, like where you actually have some room to come up with a solution that works for everybody. Because ultimately, you're hiring them. They want to secure you as their client. So if you tell them, I can only spend $4,000 on food, how can we feed 100 people? Help me figure it out. If they want your contract and you say my out the door final bill with gratuity needs to be $4,000, they will help you figure out that solution. Now, it may mean you don't get 5 side dishes. It may mean you have 1 meat instead of 2. They will find ways to work the numbers for you. Let them take that on. And the biggest thing is just to get yourself out of the big venue mess where they're setting all the rules.
So what I'm hearing is that you need to be the driver and not be in the passenger seat of the wedding vendor when you're
Absolutely.
Planning your wedding.
Yes, you need to say, this is what I can spend. I love what you guys do. I've seen you cater at other weddings. It was amazing. I want to hire you, but how can you work with me at this price point?
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. I am having the sort of traditional big ballroom wedding in a hotel in Maine. Although we don't have as much control over the caterer or the type of chairs or anything like that, we found that there were ways to negotiate just based on making slight changes, like having our wedding in a non-peak season versus the middle of June on a Saturday. So being able to say, you're probably not going to book this venue this weekend for this type of event. We do have some control there. So we were able to negotiate that. And that also brought the price down on everything else that we were looking at. We noticed that, automatically we're going to get 20 to 30% off all of our vendors if we go non-peak season. So there are some slight changes if you did want to go that more traditional classic wedding track as well.
Absolutely. You're totally on point there. And there is a benefit to those big centralized wedding venues. They're easy. They're easy to work with. They do it all for you. They'll tell you, what vendors to use or ones that they recommend. Sometimes there are kickbacks and that's why they recommend them. So you still want to investigate and research those vendors before you hire them. But they will take a lot of that stress off your plate. Like I said from the beginning, your budget should be dictated by your priorities. So if your priority is guest experience, you're going to go down one path of how you spend your money. If your priority is ease and making your life simpler in this planning process, that's a different path. If you want your wedding to look over the top glam, you might go a different way. You just want to capture beautiful memories of your day and have amazing photos, then that might be a different way you set your budget priorities. So I think what you're doing is very smart, and obviously you can always optimize the timing. And as you said, just the less priority days of the year. My husband and I actually got married the Saturday after Thanksgiving, definitely off peak season. And what was really nice is, as you mentioned, the venue was more affordable. The vendors were all more affordable. And we got access to our event space the day before the wedding, the day of the wedding, and the day after. So we had tons of time to set up, to break down the event. We didn't really need to hire staff to help us because we had so many people in town who could help, and we had plenty of time to do it.
So I feel like there's a lot of money that you put down up front on down payments for vendors, even just like if you're buying a dress super in advance. And then there's a lot of money that you spend on the day or a couple weeks before the day. Is there a way that you recommend planning out that money schedule and also coordinating with those, family and friends that might be contributing money to that wedding?
Definitely. This is something I recommend couples handle early on. Again, when you're having that really big, awkward conversation about money and expectations for your wedding, this is part of that. And it feels really uncomfortable to ask your parents, who are being super generous and giving you money towards your wedding, to give it to you on a payment plan. But that's what I would recommend you do. I really, really highly encourage couples to open a high yield savings account for your wedding that is not at the same bank you normally bank at. So there's like very little temptation. You're going to tap into that money early and have your savings, whatever you put away each month towards your wedding, just automatically moved over there. I'd have your parents do that, any other relative who's contributing. And if they're in a position where they can just drop the whole amount in early, great. But if not, I make a plan with them of what is a comfortable pace for them to put the money in there so that you don't have to wait and hopefully, have the money there on the day that it's due. I just plan to get it in there early. So that's going to be a way to save. And with the high yield savings account, you're going to get a couple of percentage points of interest off that. So if you're planning a wedding a year, 18 months in advance, you're going to have some time to actually build up some free money from it sitting in that account. I would double that. I would kind of double down by opening a new credit card and doing some credit card hacking. There are so many great travel deals, travel rewards, different point systems you can tap into that give you a huge bonus for the money you're going to be spending no matter what. So that way, if you spend 10 grand, you end up with 3 grand worth of free flights and a hotel stay. So your honeymoon is covered. For different people, there are going to be different benefits that would be most lucrative or helpful for them. Definitely a benefit that if you skip, you're missing out on potentially 20 or 30% of what you're spending on your wedding that could come back to you as a rewards point.
The credit card hacking is definitely crucial.
I'm not saying go use this credit card and spend double what you can afford to pay. And that's why teaming it up with the high yield savings so that you can pay that card down immediately is super important. But it gives you a little bit of extra time to pay those balances too. When you have the card, you normally have a 30 or 45 day window before the payments due. So if you have relatives contributing and their money is showing up a little slower than it should, that gives you a little buffer to get that paid as well.
Oh, that's so true. Just really grateful for your super practical, get real wedding planning advice, Heather. This has been so eye-opening.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share it. Yeah, I love kind of reminding people of these points, and I wrote a whole book about it, and I'd love to, share that with your audience as well. People can download that. It's theweddinghacker.com/playbook, and they can all grab a free digital copy. I'm happy to share the info with them. There's tons of details and actionable resources in there. Different companies I recommend using that approach varied aspects of a wedding, like flowers or videography, making your timeline, all these different things from a perspective that's really budget minded and actually works for couples on any budget.
Thank you so much. I think you're giving couples the gift of not starting out their married life in debt and with the additional financial stress on top of it.
Wonderful. I was so happy to be here.
You've been listening to the 411K. Tune in for more podcasts and follow us on Instagram at _411K. Cheers.